The morning started like any other Tuesday for Rachel. She woke up at 6, made herself a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, and headed out to work by 7:30. Her job wasn't glamorous, but she loved it. She was a piano tuner, spending her days in concert halls, music schools, and sometimes private homes, making sure every piano sounded exactly as it should. Most people didn't understand what her job really involved. They thought she just twisted a few pegs and called it a day. But Rachel knew better. She understood that each piano had its own personality, its own voice. Some were bright and cheerful, others were deep and moody. Her job was to help them speak clearly, to bring out their best qualities. It required patience, a good ear, and years of training. Rachel had that training. She'd studied at one of the best music schools in the country, spending 4 years learning not just how to tune pianos, but how to play them at a professional level. She'd been good too, really good. Her professors had said she had something special, a way of making the piano sing that went beyond just hitting the right notes, but life had other plans. In her final year, her mother got sick. Really sick. The medical bills piled up fast, and someone needed to be there to take care of her. Rachel's father had passed away years before, and she was an only child. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. She left school 3 months before graduation and never went back. That was 12 years ago. Her mother had recovered, thank goodness, and was now living comfortably in a small apartment across town. Rachel visited her every Sunday without fail. As for the performing career she'd once dreamed of, well, that had faded into the background. She told herself she was fine with it. She had a steady job, a roof over her head, and she still got to work with music every day. That was enough. It had to be enough. On this particular Tuesday, Rachel was scheduled to work at Sterling Concert Hall, one of the most prestigious venues in the city. She'd been there dozens of times before, tuning pianos for famous performers whose names appeared on billboards and magazine covers. She never minded being invisible at these events. In fact, she preferred it. No pressure, no expectations, just her and the instrument. She arrived at the concert hall around 9 in the morning, carrying her tuning kit and wearing her usual work clothes, comfortable jeans and a plain sweater. The staff knew her by now and waved her through security. Without checking her ID, she made her way to the VIP lounge on the 3rd floor, where she was supposed to tune the grand piano they used for private events. The lounge was beautiful. Old marble floors and velvet furniture with huge windows overlooking the city. The piano sat in the corner, a gorgeous black Steinway that probably cost more than Rachel would make in 5 years. She ran her hand across its smooth surface before opening the lid and getting to work. Tuning a piano was meditative for her. The rest of the world faded away as she listened to each note, making tiny adjustments until everything was perfect. She was about halfway through when she noticed people rushing around outside the lounge. Event coordinators with clipboards, staff members moving chairs and tables, everyone looking stressed. Rachel didn't pay much attention at first. Concert halls were always chaotic before big events. But then she heard raised voices, the kind that suggested something had gone seriously wrong. She tried to focus on her work, but curiosity got the better of her. She could hear snippets of conversation through the open door. "What do you mean he can't make it? The gala is tomorrow." I know, but he's in the hospital. Emergency surgery? There's no way he can perform. We need to find someone else. Do you understand what this event means? Every major donor in the city will be there. The governor is coming? We can't just not have music." Rachel's hands paused over the piano keys. They were talking about tomorrow's annual philanthropy gala, one of the biggest social events of the year. She'd tuned the piano for it last year too, though she hadn't stayed for the actual event. From what she'd heard, it was where the city's wealthiest and most powerful people gathered to write big checks for charity. While wearing clothes that cost more than most people's cars, the voices grew more frantic. Someone suggested hiring a DJ instead. Someone else mentioned calling every professional pianist in the area. A third person was looking up agencies online. Growing more desperate with each passing minute, Rachel finished tuning the last few notes and was packing up her equipment. when a woman in an expensive suit burst into the lounge. She was talking rapidly on her phone, clearly the person in charge of organizing tomorrow's disaster. She paced back and forth, not even noticing Rachel in the corner. "I've called everyone," the woman said into her phone. "Everyone who's any good is already booked or out of town. We're completely stuck." She hung up and pressed her hands against her face. Taking a deep breath, Rachel stood up, her tuning kit in hand, ready to quietly slip out. But as she moved toward the door, her foot caught on the piano bench and it scraped loudly against the floor. The woman's head snapped up. "Oh," the woman said, startled. "I didn't see you there. Are you done with the piano?" "Yes, all finished," Rachel replied, trying to edge past her, but the woman was staring at her now, really staring, like she was seeing Rachel for the first time. Her eyes drifted to the piano, then back to Rachel, then to the tuning equipment in her hands. "You work with pianos," the woman said slowly. "Yes, I'm a piano tuner. But to tune a piano, you have to know how to play one, right?" Rachel felt her stomach tighten. She knew where this was going. "Well, yes, you need to understand music, and can you play? Like, actually perform?" The question hung in the air between them. Rachel could have said no. She could have explained that tuning and performing were completely different things, that she hadn't played for an audience in over a decade, that she wasn't that person anymore. Instead, she heard herself say, "I can play." The woman's face transformed instantly. Relief, hope, and desperation all mixed together. "Please tell me you're free tomorrow night. Please, I am begging you. Our pianist had to have emergency surgery. And we have 300 guests coming to this gala. And no music, and I cannot tell the director that we're going to fail. Because I couldn't find one pianist in a city of 3 million. People." Rachel's mind was racing. This was insane. She couldn't perform at a gala for wealthy elites. She was a piano tuner who wore jeans to work and lived in a tiny studio apartment. These people would expect someone in an evening gown who'd played at Carnegie Hall, not someone who'd spent the last decade in the background, invisible, but the woman was looking at her with such desperate hope, and Rachel found herself nodding before her brain could catch up with her mouth. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'll do it." The woman actually grabbed her hands. "Thank you. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means. Be here tomorrow at 5 for sound check. The performance starts at 7. She pulled out a business card and pressed it into Rachel's palm before rushing off. Already on her phone again, probably to tell someone that the crisis had been solved, Rachel stood alone in the VIP lounge, staring at the business card in her hand, wondering what on earth she had just agreed to do. Rachel stood in front of her closet that evening, staring at the handful of clothes hanging there. She'd said yes to performing at one of the city's most exclusive events, and now reality was hitting her like a bucket of cold water. What was she going to wear? Everything she owned was practical, comfortable, meant for tuning pianos and running errands, not for standing in front of 300 wealthy people in evening gowns and tuxedos. She pulled out a black dress she'd worn to a friend's wedding 3 years ago. It was nice enough, but definitely not gala material. There was a dark blue blouse that might work, but it had a small stain on the sleeve she'd never quite managed to get out. Her nicest pair of pants had a broken zipper. Rachel sat down on her bed, feeling the panic start to build in her chest. What had she been thinking? She couldn't do this. She should call that woman right now and tell her there'd been a mistake, that she'd made a terrible error in judgment, that she wasn't the right person for this job, but even as she thought it, Rachel knew she wouldn't make that call. Something had stirred inside her when she'd said yes, something she'd buried years ago. A small voice that whispered, "Remember when you used to dream about performing? Remember when music was everything?" A knock on her door interrupted her spiral of worry. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, a retired seamstress who lived in the apartment next door. The walls in their building were thin, and Mrs. Kowalski had probably heard Rachel pacing around and muttering to herself. "You okay in there, dear?" The older woman asked when Rachel opened the door. Rachel tried to smile. I'm fine, just having a small crisis about what to wear tomorrow. What's tomorrow? Before Rachel knew it, the whole story came tumbling out. The broken-down pianist, the desperate event coordinator, her moment of insanity when she'd agreed to perform at a gala for the city's elite. Mrs. Kowalski listened carefully, her eyes growing wider with each detail. And you said yes? Oh, Rachel, that's wonderful. It's terrifying is what it is. And I have nothing to wear. I can't show up in my work clothes. Mrs. Kowalski's face lit up. Wait, right here. She disappeared into her apartment and came back 5 minutes later carrying a dress in a garment bag. My daughter left this here last Christmas. She bought it for a fancy party but never wore it. You two are about the same size. Rachel unzipped the bag carefully. Inside was a simple but elegant navy dress, the kind that looked expensive without trying too hard. It had clean lines and a classic cut that wouldn't go out of style. She held it up against herself and Mrs. Kowalski nodded approvingly. Try it on, her neighbor urged. The dress fit perfectly. Rachel looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. She looked like someone who belonged at a gala, someone confident and professional. For just a moment, the panic subsided. Now, Mrs. Kowalski said firmly, stop worrying about the dress and go practice. That's what you should be thinking about. Rachel thanked her neighbor and hung the dress carefully on the back of her door. Then she sat down at her old upright piano, the one she'd bought used 10 years ago. It wasn't fancy, and the action was a bit stiff, but it was hers and it held a tune well enough. She started with scales, warming up her fingers. Then she moved on to pieces she used to know by heart. Some of them came back easily, muscle memory kicking in like she'd never stopped playing. Others were rusty, her fingers stumbling over passages that used to flow smoothly. Rachel practiced until midnight, taking only short breaks to rest her hands. The event coordinator hadn't told her what to play, just that she needed to provide music during the silent auction and then perform one featured piece before dinner. That gave her some freedom, but also a lot of responsibility. What kind of music did wealthy donors want to hear? Classical, probably. Safe choices. Nothing too experimental or emotional. She decided on Debussy and Chopin for the background music, pieces that were beautiful but wouldn't demand too much attention. For her featured performance, she chose a Beethoven sonata, something impressive but not too showy. It was a good plan, a safe plan. She practiced until her fingers ached and her eyes grew heavy, then finally collapsed into bed. Sleep didn't come easily. Rachel's mind kept racing through everything that could go wrong. What if she forgot the music? What if her hands shook? What if people talked through her entire performance and didn't even notice she was there? That last thought bothered her more than she wanted to admit. After 12 years of being invisible, part of her desperately wanted to be seen, to be heard, to matter. The next day crawled by. Rachel couldn't focus on anything. She tried to eat lunch, but her stomach was too nervous. She tried to read a book, but couldn't get past the first page. Finally, at 3 in the afternoon, she started getting ready. She showered, dried her hair carefully, and put on a little makeup. The navy dress looked even better than she remembered. She added the simple pearl earrings her mother had given her for her 21st birthday and looked at herself one more time in the mirror. You can do this, she told her reflection. You've done harder things. You can do this. The taxi ride to Sterling Concert Hall felt both too long and too short. Rachel watched the city pass by her window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When they pulled up to the main entrance, she saw workers rolling out a red carpet and setting up velvet ropes. Limousines were already starting to arrive. Even though the event didn't start for another 2 hours, Rachel's driver pulled up to the front entrance, but a security guard immediately waved them away. Service entrance is in the back, he called out. Not even looking at her. The driver shrugged and drove around to the back of the building. Rachel got out, paid him, and walked toward the plain metal door marked Staff Only. It was the same door she always used when she came to tune pianos, but today it felt different. Today it felt like a reminder that she didn't really belong here, that she was just the help. Filling in because the real performer couldn't make it, she showed her ID to the security guard at the back entrance, and he checked a list on his clipboard. You're the piano player? Yes, he looked her up and down, clearly skeptical. They usually come in through the front. Well, I came in through the back, Rachel said, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. Inside, the concert hall was organized chaos. Staff members rushed around with chairs and tables and boxes of wine glasses. Someone was yelling about flower arrangements. Someone else was on the phone arguing about the menu. Rachel walked through the corridors toward the main ballroom, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She pushed open the door to the ballroom and stopped in her tracks. She'd seen this room before, but never like this. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, throwing sparkles of light across everything. Round tables covered in white linen filled the space, each one decorated with elaborate centerpieces. The stage at the far end was lit with soft purple lights, and sitting center stage was the Steinway grand piano she'd tuned just yesterday. "There you are." The event coordinator appeared at her elbow, looking slightly less frantic than yesterday, but still running on pure stress and coffee. "Come on, let's get you set up. We have exactly 90 minutes before guests start arriving." Rachel followed her to the stage, her heart pounding. This was really happening. In less than 2 hours, she would be sitting at that piano while 300 of the city's richest and most powerful people watched. Or more likely didn't watch. They'd probably just talk among themselves, barely noticing her at all. But as Rachel sat down at the piano and played a few test notes, feeling the familiar weight of the keys under her fingers, something shifted inside her. This was her world. These people might have money and status and fancy clothes, but she understood this piano. She knew its voice, its personality. She'd been the one to make it sound this good. Maybe, just maybe, she could remind them that music mattered. That the person playing wasn't just background noise, but someone with a story worth hearing. The coordinator was talking about timing and cues, but Rachel barely heard her. She was too busy looking at the empty ballroom, imagining it full of people, imagining the moment when her fingers would touch these keys and everything would change. The first guest started arriving at exactly 7 o'clock. Rachel watched from backstage as they entered the ballroom, and it was like watching a different species of human being. The women wore gowns that probably cost more than Rachel's entire year of rent, covered in sequins and silk that caught the light with every movement. Their jewelry sparkled so brightly it almost hurt to look at. The men were in perfectly tailored tuxedos, their watches and cufflinks discreet but clearly expensive. Rachel's borrowed navy dress suddenly felt very plain. Her simple pearl earrings felt like costume jewelry. She touched her hair nervously, wondering if she should have done something fancier with it. But there was no time for second thoughts now. The event coordinator gave her a quick nod, and it was time to start. She walked across the stage to the piano, trying to look confident even though her legs felt shaky. A few people glanced her way, but most were too busy greeting each other, air-kissing cheeks and complimenting outfits. Rachel sat down at the piano bench, adjusted her position, and took a deep breath. As she started to play, she began with Debussy, soft and flowing, the kind of music that was meant to fill space without demanding attention. Her fingers moved across the keys, and the nervousness started to fade. This part she could do. This was just like all those hours she'd spent practicing. Just her and the piano and the music. The silent auction was happening around her. Guests walked between tables covered with auction items, glossy brochures describing luxury vacations and rare wine collections and private dinners with celebrities. They held champagne glasses that caught the light, laughing and chatting. A few people were actually bidding, writing down numbers on little cards, but most were just socializing. Rachel continued playing, moving from Debussy to Chopin. She chose a nocturne, something gentle and pretty. Her hands knew these pieces so well she didn't have to think about the notes, which was good because part of her brain was very aware of the room around her, of how she was essentially invisible to most of these people. A woman in a red dress walked past the stage, talking loudly on her phone about a business deal. She didn't even glance at Rachel. A man in a tuxedo stood right in front of the piano, completely blocking the view of half the room, while he told a long story to his friends. They all laughed at the punchline, their voices carrying over the music. Rachel felt something twist in her chest. This was exactly what she'd expected, but it still stung. She was just background noise to them. The help. Not even worth noticing. She finished the chopping piece and transitioned into another one, keeping her face neutral and professional. That's what they were paying her for, after all. Well, actually, she wasn't even sure if they were paying her. The event coordinator had been so desperate yesterday that they'd never discussed money. Rachel had been too flustered to bring it up. The silent auction continued for another hour. Rachel played through her entire planned repertoire and then started over again. Her fingers moved automatically while her mind wandered. She watched the guests studying them. There was an older couple who seemed genuinely in love, holding hands as they walked between auction tables. A young woman who kept checking her phone with an anxious expression. A man who looked incredibly bored, probably dragged here by his wife. Finally, the event coordinator appeared at the edge of the stage and gave Rachel a signal. The silent auction was ending, and dinner was about to be served. Rachel played a few more minutes while guests found their assigned tables, then brought the piece to a gentle close. Staff members appeared from everywhere, bringing out salads and filling water glasses. The coordinator hurried over to Rachel during the brief break. "You're doing great," she whispered. After they finish the salad course, the director will introduce you for the featured performance. Just play that Beethoven piece you mentioned and you'll be done. Thank you so much for saving us. Rachel nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. The background music had been easy. Nobody was paying attention anyway. But the featured performance would be different. The director would literally tell everyone to stop talking and listen. They would all be looking at her, expecting something worthy of their time and money. She watched as the guests ate their salads, still chatting and laughing. These people were used to the best of everything. They probably went to the symphony regularly, saw famous performers at fancy venues. What was she compared to that? Just a piano tuner who'd given up her dreams 12 years ago. The salad plates were cleared away. The director, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, stood up and walked to a microphone at the front of the room. He tapped it twice, and the conversations gradually quieted down. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "As you know, this gala supports arts education for underprivileged children throughout our city. Thanks to your generosity, we've already raised over $2 million this evening." Applause filled the room. Rachel's eyes widened. $2 million. These people had just casually donated more money than she'd see in her entire lifetime, and they were treating it like no big deal. The director continued, "Now, I'd like to introduce this evening's musical entertainment. Due to an unexpected circumstance, we have a different performer than originally planned. Please welcome our pianist for the evening." That was it. That was her introduction. No name, no background, just our pianist. Rachel stood up and walked to the center of the stage, feeling hundreds of eyes on her. She gave a small bow, then returned to the piano bench. This was the moment. She was supposed to play the Beethoven sonata she'd practiced. The safe choice that would satisfy everyone and let her slip back into invisibility when it was over. But as her hands hovered over the keys, something stopped her. She looked out at all those faces, those people who had so much and yet had barely noticed her existence all evening. She thought about the director's words about arts education for underprivileged children. Kids who probably felt invisible too, who had dreams but no resources to chase them. Rachel thought about her own story. Leaving music school to take care of her mother. Spending 12 years in the background, tuning pianos for other people to play. Telling herself she was fine with it, that dreams didn't matter as much as being practical, but she wasn't fine with it. And those kids the gala was supposed to help deserve better than someone just going through the motions, playing it safe, staying invisible. Her hands settled on the keys, and she made a decision. She wasn't going to play the Beethoven. She was going to play something real, something that mattered. Something that told the truth about what it felt like to have talent but no opportunity, to have dreams but no platform. To be invisible in a room full of people who never had to worry about being seen. Years ago, when her mother was in the hospital, Rachel had written a piece. She'd never played it for anyone, never even written it down properly. It lived only in her memory and her fingers. It was about grief and fear and love and determination. It was raw and honest and nothing like the polite classical music these people expected. Rachel took one more breath, and then she began to play her truth. The first notes were soft and sad, almost fragile. A melody that spoke of loss and loneliness. She could feel the room's attention sharpening, people who'd been half listening now actually focusing on the music. Her fingers moved faster, the piece building in intensity, adding layers of complexity. She wasn't thinking about technique anymore, wasn't worried about making mistakes. She was just feeling, letting the music pour out of her like it had been bottled up for 12 years. The piece grew stronger, more defiant. The sadness was still there, but now there was anger too, and hope and resilience. Rachel's eyes were closed now. She'd forgotten about the audience entirely. This wasn't a performance anymore. It was a conversation between her and the piano, between her past and her present. Between who she'd been and who she might still become. The music swelled to a powerful crescendo, her hands moving across the entire keyboard, using every bit of skill she'd ever learned. Then, gradually, it softened again, finding a resolution that wasn't quite happy but wasn't sad either. It was real. It was honest. It was enough. The final note faded into silence. For what felt like an eternity, there was complete silence in the ballroom. Rachel kept her eyes closed, her hands still resting on the piano keys, afraid to look up and see the faces staring at her. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. What had she just done? She'd completely abandoned the plan, played something nobody asked for, something raw and emotional and probably completely inappropriate for a fancy charity. Gala, she'd made a huge mistake, then someone started clapping. Just one person at first, slow and deliberate. Then another joined in. And another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in applause. Not the polite, scattered clapping she'd heard earlier when the director mentioned the fundraising total. This was different. This was real. Rachel finally opened her eyes and looked out at the audience. People were standing up. A standing ovation. For her. The woman in the red dress who'd walked past her earlier talking on her phone was on her feet, clapping with tears running down her face, not even caring that her makeup was smudging. The bored-looking man was standing too, a genuine smile on his face for the first time all evening. Rachel stood up slowly, not quite believing what was happening. She gave a small bow, her hands shaking, and the applause grew even louder. She could see faces clearly now, and they weren't looking through her anymore. They were really seeing her, and more than that, they'd heard her. The music had reached them in a way she never expected. As she walked off the stage, her legs felt wobbly. The event coordinator met her at the side, and the woman was actually crying. "That was incredible," she whispered. "I've been organizing events for 15 years, and I've never seen a response like that. Never." Rachel didn't know what to say. She mumbled a thank you and found a quiet corner backstage where she could catch her breath. Her hands were still trembling. She'd taken such a risk, and somehow, impossibly, it had paid off. But now what? She'd go back to her regular life, tuning pianos in empty rooms, and this night would become just a memory. A strange and wonderful moment that happened once and would never happen again. She was thinking about calling a taxi to go home when a staff member found her. "Excuse me, there are some people who'd like to speak with you." Rachel followed him back toward the ballroom, assuming it was just the event coordinator wanting to thank her again or maybe ask for her invoice. But when she walked through the door, at least a dozen people were waiting for her, and they all started talking at once. A man in an expensive suit thrust his business card into her hand. "I own 3 restaurants downtown, and I've been looking for someone to play during weekend dinner service. Your style is exactly what we need, that perfect blend of classical training and emotional depth." Before Rachel could respond, a woman stepped forward. "I'm on the board of the City Arts Foundation. We host concerts every month, and we'd love to have you perform. We need to get you on our schedule immediately." Another voice chimed in. "Do you teach?" "My daughter is 16 and studying piano, but her current instructor is so boring." She needs someone who plays with passion like you do. Rachel's head was spinning. She tried to process what was happening, tried to respond to everyone, but new people kept approaching. A wedding planner wanted her for ceremonies. A corporate event manager needed entertainment for company parties. Someone from a recording studio wanted to discuss an album project. She was writing down names and numbers on scraps of paper, her mind racing. This was surreal. An hour ago, she'd been invisible. Now everyone wanted a piece of her time and talent. It was overwhelming and thrilling and terrifying all at once. Then the crowd parted slightly, and an older woman approached. She was elegant and composed, probably in her late 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes. Unlike everyone else who'd been talking excitedly, she waited quietly until Rachel had a moment to breathe. "Hello, Rachel," the woman said softly. Rachel froze. "How do you know my name?" "Because I remember you. From 12 years ago. You were one of my students." Recognition hit Rachel like a wave. Professor Helen Chun, one of the most respected piano instructors at the music school, someone Rachel had admired deeply but had only worked with briefly before she'd left. Rachel had sat in on a few of her master classes, had desperately wanted to study with her directly. But Professor Chun only took advanced students, and Rachel hadn't quite reached that level yet when she'd left school. "Professor Chun," Rachel breathed. "I can't believe you remember me." "Of course I remember you. You had something special, even then. I was disappointed when you left. The school lost a very promising talent." The professor's expression was thoughtful, studying Rachel carefully. "I've often wondered what happened to you. Where you went. Whether you kept playing." Rachel felt her throat tighten. "My mother got sick. I had to leave to take care of her. And then life just happened. I became a piano tuner instead." "A piano tuner." Professor Chun smiled slightly. "That explains the technical perfection in your playing tonight." "But Rachel, what I heard up there wasn't just technical skill. That was artistry. That was someone who has truly lived and has something meaningful to say." They moved to a quieter corner of the room, away from the chaos of people still trying to get Rachel's attention. Professor Chun folded her hands in her lap and looked at Rachel seriously. "I'm going to be direct with you because life is too short for anything else. I'm the director of programming for the City Symphony now, have been for the past 5 years. We have a resident artist program, positions for talented musicians who want to develop their careers while also giving back to the community. They perform regularly, they teach master classes, they work with our education outreach programs." Rachel's heart started beating faster again. "That sounds amazing, but one of our resident artists is moving to Europe next month." "The position is open." Professor Chun pulled out her own business card and placed it carefully in Rachel's hand. "I'd like to offer it to you. Not because I feel sorry for you or because you used to be my student, but because what I heard tonight was exactly what this city needs. Authentic music. Honest music. The kind of performance that reminds people why art matters." Rachel stared at the business card, unable to speak. A position with the City Symphony. Regular performances. Teaching opportunities. Everything she dreamed about 12 years ago, being offered to her now, in this impossible moment. "I know it's a lot to take in," Professor Chun said gently. "You don't have to answer right now. But I want you to know that you have options. You don't have to spend the rest of your life in the background if you don't want to. That piece you played tonight, that original composition, it deserves to be heard. You deserve to be heard." Rachel felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She blinked them back, trying to maintain some composure. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it. Say you'll come to my office next week so we can talk properly without all this chaos." Professor Chun gestured at the crowded room. "And say you'll keep playing your truth like you did tonight." "I will," Rachel managed. "Yes, to all of that." Professor Chun smiled warmly and squeezed Rachel's hand before walking away. Rachel stood there, clutching the business card, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. She'd gone from invisible piano tuner to someone everyone wanted to talk to. She'd taken the biggest risk of her life and somehow landed on her feet. More people approached her after that. She lost count of how many business cards she collected, how many offers she received. The event coordinator finally rescued her, pulling her aside with a check for her performance that was 3 times what Rachel usually made in a week tuning pianos. "You earned every penny," the coordinator said firmly. That performance was the highlight of the entire evening. People are still talking about it. You made this gala something they'll actually remember instead of just another fancy dinner. As the evening wound down and guests started leaving, Rachel found herself sitting alone at one of the empty tables, surrounded by the remnants of the party. Discarded programs, empty champagne glasses, the faint scent of expensive perfume still lingering in the air. The lights were being dimmed, and staff members were quietly starting to clean up. She pulled out all the business cards she'd collected and spread them across the table. Restaurant owner, wedding planner, Arts Foundation board member, recording studio manager, private music instructor. And on top of them all, Professor Chun's card with the City Symphony logo. Rachel picked up that card and ran her thumb over the embossed letters. A week ago, she'd been completely content with her invisible life, or at least she'd convinced herself she was. She had a steady job, she paid her bills, she saw her mother on Sundays. It was enough, but tonight had reminded her that there was a difference between enough and fulfilling. Between surviving and actually living. Between being invisible and being seen. She thought about that original piece she'd played, the one she'd written during the darkest time of her life. She'd poured all her pain and fear and love into that music, and then she'd locked it away, convinced that nobody would ever want to hear it. Convinced that nobody would ever want to hear her. She'd been wrong. Rachel carefully gathered all the business cards and put them in her purse. Then she stood up, smoothed down her borrowed navy dress, and walked out of the... Rachel didn't sleep much that night. She kept replaying everything in her mind, wondering if it had all really happened or if she'd wake up and discover it was just an elaborate dream. But the navy dress hanging on her closet door was real. The stack of business cards on her nightstand was real. The check in her wallet was definitely real. Around 3 a.m, she finally gave up on sleep and made herself a cup of tea. She sat by her small kitchen window, looking out at the quiet city streets, and let herself think about what Professor Chun had offered her. A position with the City Symphony. Not just occasional performances, but a real job doing what she loved. A chance to teach, to inspire other musicians, to be part of something bigger than herself. It was everything she'd wanted when she was 20 years old. But she wasn't 20 anymore. She was 32 with a life she'd built, responsibilities she'd taken on. Could she really change everything now? Was it even possible to go back and pick up dreams you'd set down over a decade ago? Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her mother, who'd apparently also been up at 3 a.m. "Can't sleep. Thinking about you. Call me when you wake up. Love you," Rachel smiled. Her mother always seemed to know when she was going through something. She decided to call right then, figuring if her mom was awake anyway, they might as well talk. "Hi, sweetheart," her mother answered on the second ring. "I had a feeling you'd be up. How do you always know?" "Because I'm your mother. That's my job. Now tell me what's going on? You sounded strange when you called yesterday about borrowing Mrs. Kowalski's dress." So Rachel told her everything. The desperate event coordinator, the gala, the decision to play her own composition instead of sticking to the plan. The standing ovation. All the people offering her work. And finally, the offer from Professor Chun. There was a long silence on the other end of the line when Rachel finished. For a moment, she worried the call had dropped. Then her mother spoke, and her voice was thick with emotion. "Rachel Ann Peterson, are you seriously calling me at 3 a.m. to ask permission to chase your dreams?" "I'm not asking permission, because if you're worried about me, if you're thinking about turning down this opportunity because you feel guilty about leaving school 12 years ago, I will get in a taxi right now and come over there to knock some sense into you." Rachel felt tears spring to her eyes. "Mom, I don't regret taking care of you. I never have. I know you don't, baby. and I will be grateful for that for the rest of my life. But I never wanted you to give up on your music forever. I always hoped you'd find your way back to it. And now here's the universe, handing you a second chance on a silver platter, and you're sitting there in your apartment at 3 in the morning wondering if you should take it. It's scary, Rachel admitted. What if I'm not good enough? What if last night was just a fluke? What if it wasn't? Her mother countered. What if you're exactly as talented as that professor says you are? What if you spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been, just because you were too afraid to try? They talked for another hour until the sky started getting light outside Rachel's window. By the time they hung up, Rachel knew what she was going to do. She was terrified, but she was going to do it anyway. She waited until 9 o'clock, when she figured Professor Chun might be in her office, then called the number on the business card. Her hands were shaking as she dialed, and she almost hung up twice before someone answered. City Symphony, this is Professor Chun's office. Hi, this is Rachel Peterson. I performed at the Gala last night and Professor Chun asked me to call. Oh, yes. She's been waiting for your call. Hold on just a moment. Rachel's heart pounded during the brief silence. Then Professor Chun's warm voice came through the line. Rachel, I'm so glad you called. I was hoping I hadn't scared you off with my offer last night. No, not at all. I've been thinking about it all night, actually. I'd love to come in and talk about the resident artist position. They scheduled a meeting for the following Monday. When Rachel hung up, she felt like she was floating. This was really happening. She was really doing this. The weekend passed in a blur. Rachel returned the navy dress to Mrs. Kowalski, who hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. She organized all the business cards and started making a plan for how to follow up with each one. And she practiced, spending hours at her old upright piano, playing everything from classical pieces to her own compositions, trying to quiet the nervous voice in her head that kept saying she wasn't ready for this. Monday. Morning arrived too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Rachel dressed carefully in her best work clothes, which weren't particularly fancy but were clean and professional. She took the bus to the Symphony Hall, a beautiful old building downtown that she'd passed hundreds of times but had never actually been inside. The interior was stunning. High ceilings, elegant archways, photographs of famous musicians lining the walls. A young man at the reception desk directed her to Professor Chun's office on the 3rd floor. Rachel climbed the stairs slowly, her palms sweating, rehearsing in her head what she wanted to say. Professor Chun's office was lined with books and sheet music, with a window overlooking the city. The professor herself was sitting at her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose, studying some papers. She looked up when Rachel knocked and smiled. Come in, come in. Sit down. Can I get you some coffee or tea? Rachel shook her head, too nervous to drink anything. She sat in the chair across from Professor Chun's desk and folded her hands in her lap. I want to be honest with you, Professor Chun began, setting aside her papers. The resident artist position is demanding. You'd be expected to perform at least twice a month, sometimes more. You'd teach master classes for our advanced students. You'd work with our community outreach program, bringing music to schools that can't afford their own programs. It's not easy, and it's definitely not glamorous all the time. I understand, Rachel said quietly. But it's also incredibly rewarding. You'd have access to world-class practice facilities, opportunities to collaborate with talented musicians, and a chance to develop your own artistic voice. That piece you played at the Gala, that original composition, that's the kind of music we want to encourage. We need artists who have something real to say. Professor Chun opened a folder on her desk and pulled out some papers. This is the contract. The salary isn't going to make you rich, but it's fair. You'd start next month, which gives you time to wrap up your current work obligations. I should mention several board members heard you perform on Saturday night, and they've already approved this hire. But I need to know if you're truly ready for this. If you're willing to put yourself out there, take risks, be vulnerable in your art. Rachel thought about the past 12 years. All the pianos she'd tuned, all the performances she'd listened to while working in empty halls, all the times she'd told herself she was fine with being invisible. She thought about that moment on stage when she decided to play her own composition instead of taking the safe route. How terrified she'd been, and how alive she'd felt. "I'm ready," she said, and her voice was steady. "I'm scared, but I'm ready." Professor Chun smiled and handed her a pen. "Good, because courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway." Rachel signed the contract right there, her signature a little shaky, but clear. When she handed it back, Professor Chun stood up and shook her hand firmly. "Welcome to the City Symphony, Rachel. I think you're going to do great things here." Walking out of the symphony hall 20 minutes later, Rachel felt like she was in a daze. She'd just completely changed the direction of her life. In less than a month, she wouldn't be just a piano tuner anymore. She'd be a performing artist, a teacher, someone with a platform and a voice. She pulled out her phone and called her mother. "I did it, Mom. I signed the contract." Her mother's squeal of joy was so loud Rachel had to hold the phone away from her ear. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." "So incredibly proud, I'm terrified." "Of course you are." "That means it matters. That means you're really living, not just existing." Rachel walked through the city, not quite ready to go home yet. She passed by a Sterling concert hall where this whole crazy journey had started just 4 days ago. 4 days, that's all it had been since the event coordinator had desperately asked if she could play. Since she'd said yes without thinking, since everything had changed, she thought about the person she'd been a week ago. Content, or at least convinced she was content with her quiet, invisible life. That person felt like a stranger now. Rachel had remembered what it felt like to be seen, to be heard, to matter. And there was no going back from that. Her phone buzzed with a text from the restaurant owner she'd met at the Gala. He wanted to know if she was still interested in playing weekend dinner sets. Rachel smiled and texted back that she was, and they should discuss scheduling. Then she responded to a few other messages from people who'd reached out, setting up meetings and phone calls for later in the week. By the time Rachel got home that evening, she had a calendar full of appointments, a head full of plans, and a heart full of hope. Mrs. Kowalski knocked on her door with a homemade casserole to celebrate, and they